Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I imagine folks will be drifting in over the next few minutes, including some of our panelists. But yeah, thank you for being here. Welcome. This is a webinar put on by the Cannabis Research Center at UC Berkeley, as well as Social Science Matrix. Thank you to both of those groups for putting this together. My name is Jeff Martin. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at UC Berkeley, associated with the CRC. And I'm going to be sort of moderating today's panel. We've got about an hour, and we're lucky enough to be joined by a few cannabis producers who are going to be sharing their experiences with wildfire and smoke impacts on outdoor production. We're going to hear about their experiences, tools and techniques, different mitigation strategies that they've used, as well as sort of the broader context in which producers are navigating the challenge of wildfire in the state among the many other challenges for producers growing cannabis in California. Again, thank you to the Cannabis Research Center and Social Science Matrix. I'm going to do a little bit of a brief introduction as we wait for folks to join us, and a little bit of motivation about what this project's about. What this project is also an opportunity for us to promote some of our research that is ongoing. This project that I'm on the lead on, we've got a few of our other participants with us here today, including Christopher Dillis, another postdoctoral researcher with the Grantham Lab at Berkeley. Chris is the lead author on an in-review article titled "The Threat of Wildfire to Cannabis Agriculture in California." He's going to be sharing some of his work in a few minutes. We've also got Maggie Phillipsborn, Director of Membership and Education with the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance and lead of the Jones Bar Firewise community. We have Brian Gossman, founder, Distribution Resource Planning with Mountain Cannabis Company. And hopefully in a moment, we'll be joined by Casey Birthisel, Director of Cultivation Operations at Central Coast Agriculture, as well as Vincent Barajas of Pro Farms. So this project that we are conducting with the CRC, we've gotten some funding from California's Department of Cannabis Control. In an earlier portion of this research that Chris is going to talk about, highlighted the geospatial overlap between cannabis growing regions, sort of particularly historical growing regions in the state, and areas of high wildfire risk. And we're currently conducting a statewide survey of outdoor cannabis producers from around the state, through which we hope to collect data around the impacts of wildfire and smoke exposure on outdoor cannabis production. Those mitigation strategies I mentioned, what farmers are using around the states, we kind of learn from each other and share best practices, with the goal of better understanding the impacts of fire and smoke, how they affect grower decision-making, and hopefully to propose policy to better address the challenges, the obstacles, and increase resiliency to wildfire on these landscapes. That survey I'll say a little bit more about at the end, including where you can take it. It's open until the end of the month, and we really appreciate all the growers that are already helping us gather this data so that we can get a better sense of the diversity of experiences, what those impacts look like really at the state level. Casey, thank you for joining us. I will let all of you kind of introduce yourself when we get to that discussion. For those watching, just a little bit of a plan for the next hour. Chris is going to give us a little overview of that work, along with some slides on his findings. And then we're going to kind of open it up to a panel discussion / dialogue in which I'll sort of moderate and have some questions for these wonderful folks joining us. And we'll hear about what their own experiences from different parts of the state dealing with wildfire and smoke and other challenges of growing cannabis in California. Feel free to drop questions into the Q&A if you would. And if we have time, hopefully we can field some of those as well. Chris, I will go ahead and turn it over to you if you're ready to go.
My name is Chris Dillis. I'm a postdoc at the UC Berkeley in the Cannabis Research Center. I, for the most part, study the interaction between cannabis and water, but in about 2020, I guess this was, started looking into wildfire and cannabis because, as I have in the slide here, I mean, it's all over the news. And so we really just wanted to look at data, any data we could get our hands on, and assess some of these, more anecdotal based impacts that we were seeing. And so for that reason, let me advance this real quick. We formulated a few research questions to do this kind of preliminary study. First one being, is cannabis more vulnerable than other types of agriculture to wildfire? And so we looked at vineyards, in particular grapes and vineyards in particular, and pasture, and then all other crops together. But we singled out vineyards and pasture because those, the ranching industry, because those have also seen some media attention for impacts from wildfire, obviously. And then we wanted to look at how vulnerable cannabis is under climate change. So we have some other researchers that we brought on board who did some nice burn regime projection modeling based on the California climate assessment data set. And so we had a chance to look at that. And then finally, we wanted to know, okay, among the predominant cannabis producing counties, how much variation do we see in these metrics? And so for those of you who might have tuned in last year, these slides are going to look pretty similar. And as Jeff mentioned, there is a paper coming out. It's currently going through the journey of the publication process, but hopefully it will be out soon. And so the first thing we did was compare cannabis. And if the font is a little bit too small for you to see on your screen, cannabis is on the far left, then grapes, pasture, and general crops. And so we compared based on, so Cal Fire has this fire hazard severity zone designation, which is based on vegetation, topography, climate, all sorts of fire behavior type threats. So it's a composite hazard metric. And so as you can see in our little graph here, cannabis is in these very high and high severity zones to a much greater extent than anything else on a statewide basis. The black no data zones, there's no data essentially where there's no risk for fire. So looking at this stark comparison between cannabis and other crops, it really highlights the disparity between the two crops, or between cannabis and other types of crops. And then looking forward under these burn regime projections, cannabis again is, so all the cool colors are cold spots and all the hot colors are hot spot categories. It's not super important which ones you can see, but the dark red is a new or intensifying hotspot. And so these are, I should mention, the proportion of cannabis cultivation or other types of cultivation in each of these fire burn regime projections. And so as I have written there in the paragraph, it's pretty clear that cannabis has a more dire outlook than other crops based on where it's currently grown. And then finally, looking between counties, we see there's a pretty wide amount of variation. And as you'd expect, some of the farming in Monterey and Yolo, for instance, much lower risk zones, as opposed to, say, Trinity or even Nevada County, which I'm sure Maggie could tell us all about. The really interesting thing, and then this is going to be, I think, my second to last slide. The interesting thing is that when we look to the future burn projections, we see there are some Central Coast counties. Santa Barbara in particular is on the far left here, where it's something like 95% of their farms or 95% of cultivation areas in zones designated as projected to be new or intensifying wildfire hotspots. So this is the current locations of cannabis farming, and it's just a really interesting conversation topic to bring up as we talk about this today. So the remaining questions, as Jeff was talking about, that we're trying to get to with some of the survey data, because all the analyses we've done so far has been just looking at the risk of farms actually burning, essentially. And so there's a lot more to the question that we're going to talk about today, or a lot more to the topic that we're going to talk about today. But as we looked at the data set, only 1% of cannabis farms were actually within a burn perimeter in a given year. So like in 2020, it was about 1% of cannabis farms were actually within a known burn perimeter. So that suggests that it's really going to be this smoke and the ash and all the other indirect effects like evacuations and everything else that we really, really need to be focusing on. And so we want to know, in addition to those factors, how geographically far-reaching are how far from wildfire can you be and still be significantly impacted? And then something we're also really, really curious about is the strategies that farmers are using to mitigate some of these impacts and how effective they are, and so that we can share strategies among within the industry, and yeah, provide some beneficial assistance there. So that's the end of my slides. I'll toss it back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, right, pretty intense stuff, right? A kind of dire outlook. Obviously, increasing frequency, intensity of wildfire, along with climate change in the state, even here in the Bay Area. Of course, in the last few years, we've had days of very heavy smoke. I'm sure anybody here recalls the day we didn't even have seemingly the sun come out. But of course, those burn, ash, smoke impacts are a question of livelihood for growers around the state, and although unevenly experienced. And that's one of the motivators for our surveys, to get better data, some systematic data on those impacts, and try to learn what we can so that we can share that information among growers around the state, as well as inform hopefully future policy. So what I want to basically use the rest of our time here today to do is to hear from some of those growers. So what I'd love to have each of you do is kind of, I'll call on you and you can introduce yourself a little bit more. Your name, your role and your operations, kind of where in the state you are. And then we'll kind of dive into telling some of those stories, your experiences of fire and smoke impacts, how that's affected maybe your operations or your neighbors, some of the mitigation strategies, the practices that you're using on farm to navigate those hazards, and also how this kind of fits within a broader context, right? How do wildfire and smoke impacts articulate with other challenges that growers are facing around the state? Great. So with that, let's start with Brian.
Right on. Okay, my name's Brian Gossman. In 2017, a dear friend of mine and I started Mountain Cannabis Company here in Hayfork, which is in the very heart of Trinity County. And I've lived here now for 20 years with my wife, who actually is a firefighter on the Hayfork Fire Department and an EMT. So for many years now, on and off, we have been experiencing severe fire activity here in Trinity County. Over 20 years, I firsthand have experienced 3 large fires at our doorstep, within say 5 miles of our farm and my home, and several others, on the periphery, up to 20 miles away. But this last year, the Monument Fire came to our doorstep. We watched it creep from north of Weaverville, about 30 to 40 miles away. A month and a half later, it was on our doorstep, and it came right to the farm and actually incinerated the entire Drinkwater Mountain where we are located. It burned the entire mountain down. The only thing that was left was my home, my neighbor's home, and our farm. We watched from the field below as CAL FIRE actively dropped fire retardant on my home and the farm. And we were left with half of the farm. Half of it was completely destroyed by actual retardant drops, flattening the canopy and just soaking the plants in the retardant itself, which has left us, with all sorts of challenges that were certainly not needed up against just the rising challenges that organic permaculture, outdoor small farms are facing in the entirety of the state. But yeah, so that's who I am, and what I'm dealing with immediately in a nutshell is, the other half of our crop that we were able to save. Conflicting opinions of it smells like smoke from some distributors to it doesn't smell like smoke from others. So we will, we'll see as time goes on. But in a nutshell, that's who I am and what I'm doing, and we'll participate accordingly here over the next little bit.
My name is Maggie Phillips-Bourne. I'm the Director of Membership and Education here at the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. We are based in Nevada City. Grass Valley is our neighboring town here, for those who are not aware of where Nevada County is, but we have about 150 cultivation farmers in our membership. We have, for multiple years in a row, been impacted by fires. The 2020 Jones fire, I happen to be head of the Jones Bar Firewise community, and the Jones fire came straight through my neighborhood. But I think what I want to say here is, we have a lot of very small and micro-sized farms, 10,000 square feet and smaller. Twice with the Jones fire, as well as last year with the McFarland fire, CAL FIRE and local fire departments have been able to defend and fight these fires by utilizing legal cannabis farms because of the required water hookups, water storage, and fire hookups to those that are just baked into our county ordinance in terms of what is required for legal cannabis farms to have on site. It has twice now really saved entire neighborhood communities. I have a partner who also lives in Hayfork and is a licensed farmer. The Monument fire last fall came with, I would say, within a quarter of a mile. I have experienced a number of people who get cannabis flower returned for smelling like smoke. Ash and how farmers deal with ash, and depending on how intense that is, covering flowers and removing that in safe ways for cultivators as well as end consumers. And I think I'll leave it at that for now, but I really appreciate this conversation, and it's probably one of the most important things that we all can continue to discuss.
How's it going? Thanks for putting this together, Jeff. Yeah, my name is Casey Birthisel. I'm actually out in the field right now, which is why it's might be a little hard to hear me, so I hope I don't lose connection here. Yeah, cultivation director at Central Coast Agriculture. Our brand is Raw Garden. So we have quite a few properties across Santa Barbara County. And of course, we're in one of the highest risk areas out here. So just as Brian had said, we've had multiple fires at our proverbial doorstep over the last few years. Luckily, a lot of our material will go to concentrate. So if there is any kind of smoke taint or ash, we can usually clean that up before it gets out to the market. The flower aspect of it is very concerning. The working with the neighbors is our top priority right now. We're actually going through with our local county ag commissioner, Santa Barbara County Ag Commissioner, on developing a more robust ag pass program for our cultivators, for our farmers, which will allow employees to possess an ag pass. So during emergencies, during high wildfire season, or similar disasters, it allows the cultivators and agriculturalists in general limited emergency access to the areas that are otherwise restricted to the public, which is a big deal on our end, just because we have a lot of sensitive genetics, really big IP material on our facilities that would be first to run into and save. The biggest issue we have or have faced in the last 5 years is really the kind of supply chain issues that come with local fires and highways shutting down and limited power. That's the first thing PG&E will do around here when they get a whiff of smoke. They will just shut down power across the board. So when we have high risk controlled environment areas that need constant power, that's a big emergency on-dawn cord for us when that happens, is really being able to mitigate any loss of material, whether it be in flower form or fresh frozen form, as we do most of our material as frozen. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys getting together this and really addressing it, because it is going to become more and more of a concern. And of course, you saw in that slide, thank you for putting that together, that Santa Barbara County is not immune to high fire risk. We are surrounded by fields and hills that have not been burnt in a very long time and that could use it. So
I would like to say that I've been through a few fires in the year of 2020. Fortunately, nothing in 2021, but from what the previous growers have said in 2019, it was pretty horrifying, where all the roads were blocked heading up to Lake County, and the 175 being locked down, and the previous growers had to find different routes to leave the property and find ways to get food. 2020, we did have the glass fire and the L and V fire that burned, almost 200,000 acres. That was pretty bad, though I will say that the market has changed. So in 2020, when we had those bad fires, we didn't have any ash falling into the product, but there was times where I had some sensors to figure out what the parts per million was of the air for employees. And obviously we had to shut that down and send employees home. That was pretty bad, but fortunately we did not get any product rejected. I will say that the market has changed. So as you all probably know, buyers are a lot more pickier and very selective on what they want to purchase versus not. And so I would say that 2020, we got away with it. It was all good. We made some money. 2022, whole different story. We all know that everything we harvest in 2021, the buyers are a lot more pickier and they're looking for a lot. They're very stringent on their specs. So I will say, if for the season that we had the fire in 2020, we're good. But if that were to happen again, that would be a totally different ball game here.
And Vincent, do you mind just saying, because you didn't get your introduction, where you're based and kind of your role?
So I'm the director of farm operations. I've been a grower of vegetables for the last 10 years, growing, lettuce, cauliflower, broccoli, spinach, cilantro. And then I got into the cannabis about 3 years ago, and we're based out of Santa Barbara. I grew in Santa Barbara County for about a year and a half for Pro Farms. And then they moved me to Lake County up north by Clear Lake, Ukiah, Santa Rosa area. So I was out there for about 2 years, and now I'm back down in Merced right now. And so I've been around the block a few times. And fortunately, like I said, the fires that we had did not impact us a lot. Luckily, it was before the harvest season, so we were able to, schedule our crew around that. But now the market is different. Like somebody said in the past that, they can smell smoke and not smell smoke. Yeah, 2 years ago, that would probably not have been the case, but now, people are a lot more pickier. So I can see that not passing. They'll look for whatever excuse to not buy the product. And that goes for any commodity in the market, whether it's broccoli, cauliflower, strawberries. People are just picky when there's a lot of product on the market.
I guess I wanted to kind of circle back to, we've covered a number of things here, and I want to highlight a few as we go. First, in terms of impacts, thank you all for sharing your stories. We've got a number of different impacts. People have highlighted, obviously, the direct burn effects when those fires do come to your doorstep. Those impacts of fire sort of control measures, whether that's fire retardant drop, whether that's cutting power, the sort of aftermath of evacuation and supply chain issues, and those indirect effects of smoke and ash. And one of our audience members asked also about how ash is removed from the plants. And I'm sure that you each have kind of your own technique or experience of dealing with that. But maybe just to start, for each of you, kind of what is is there one of those, or maybe a handful of those, that are your primary concern in your region, right? Because I know in some regions, obviously fire is going to be the big one. You're actually getting those active burns. And in other places, maybe it's those indirect effects that have you more, that keep you up at night, I guess to say.
I actually would go out, have learned from experience that, putting water on your plant, if you have ash on it, can chemically cause lye to happen, and you can start, actually cooking your plant material just based on water hitting ash and the chemical transformation that happens. So I would actually take a battery powered leaf blower every day, and it seemed kind of ridiculous in the moment when I first started doing it, especially when it turned to every day for 2 months. But it worked really well. You just go start at the top and go down. We're kind of on a high to low terrace side of a mountain, but it worked really well. Blowing the ash off worked really well, and ultimately our flower did not have any ash residue on it. But 10,000 square feet with a battery powered leaf blower takes a while to do every day, but it worked.
I would second everything Brian just said about that. And I would say here in Nevada County, we are probably one of the most high fire risk areas here in the Sierra Nevadas. And so physical fire is certainly probably at the top of that list. But we are just below where we are just south of where the Dixie fire happened, which was probably one of the largest and longest burning fires in history last year. And we get a significant amount of air quality, tremendous air quality issues, smoke, but also just, I think, and I'm sure other farmers on here can relate to this, but it changes the daylight. And cannabis is very light sensitive crop cultivating wise. And there have been significant lengths of time the past, especially last year, where, we don't see the sun for a week, 2 weeks. We are seeing air quality that is off the charts hazardous. And so this comes into play, especially in my role here as director of membership. We've got farmers in the fields having to be out there doing things like what Brian is, and we have to have them in like gas masks or N95s minimum for it to be safe to tend to your crops when the air quality is literally off the charts hazard levels. And I guess the one other thing I just want to throw into the conversation is that I think everybody can agree, whether you are a cannabis cultivator or not, but if you live in Northern California, I think the past few years of fires have taken a toll on people's mental health. It is an incredibly stressful time of year. And especially in cases like the past 2 years where there are farmers who are evacuated and not able to access their property for safety reasons for weeks, if not months on end. And that just, it is beyond what any of us want to compel other people to think about what that experience is like, but it's really been a heavy toll the past couple of years.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. One of the things we're hoping to capture in this survey that we're conducting, and again, I'll say more about it at the end, but is to get a sense of how widespread these different impacts are. They're sort of uneven geography, right? Where and which regions are feeling what kind of impacts, but also just to be able to say to policymakers, for instance, hey, we did a survey of statewide growers and this percentage of people reported these kind of effects, whether that is, ash deposition, whether that's evacuation, whether that's, you can add in, we've got opportunities for folks to share their stories about, say, mental health impacts and the like. So really appreciate all the growers that have already contributed to that survey, and encourage hopefully your peers to do the same. Casey, I know you're out in the field, but if you have anything to add, feel free to chime in.
Oh no, I completely agree with everything you guys have been saying, especially Maggie. It is a mental health strain to know you've got your livelihood, investment, all those years of hard work. It's not easy to put together a legal operation in a state, and then knowing that it's at risk and there's not much you can do about it is terrifying. Yeah, it's all about, for us on my side, it's about collaboration with neighbors, making really tight relationships. We have 3 properties, so I've got 9 neighbors to talk to pretty consistently, and make sure we're taking care of each other. And if there is a risk of fire, really communicating with them, especially with this new ag pass that we're going to get here through the county, to be able to put all of our resources towards helping the fire not encroach our farm or our neighboring facilities as well.
So we've got a couple questions from the audience, including around insurance, which I want to come back to. But since we're on the question of impacts, question from Seth. Thanks for your perspectives. Does ash and smoke damage show up in laboratory testing? And if so, in what way? And I know Brian and others have also already mentioned this. I've talked with a few of you in the past about this, but can you say a bit about how testing maybe plays into this? Folks mentioned sort of the smell of smoke and having product returned, but also that it being a little bit ambiguous.
We have not had any of our 2021 flower Go 3 category testing so far yet this year. But what we are actually looking for and hoping to do is when we got hit with the fire retardant, we ended up saving various forms of flower that had been impacted by the fire retardant, be it, lightly sprinkled where you can see it on the sun leaves to, entire plants look like they were, dipped in a bucket of pink paint. And we're looking to team up with some people to have all these flowers tested, not because ethically we would never put that or even try to put that into the California state market, but it would be nice to have some sort of solid database of testing to know what that retardant is actually made up of, and what does it do to your plant, what sort of heavy metals does it introduce into your plant, because we've done countless research and can find real no hard evidence, except a bunch of hearsay, wash it off with water, it'll be fine, things of that nature that ethically we would never follow through with. So yeah, no, I don't have a specific answer to that, except to say, the nose of the flower with smoke on it is something that, as a cultivator, you don't want to see. And certainly as a purchaser, you don't want to open up your product and, have it smell like a campfire, unless your strain is called Campfire, which it probably wouldn't be. So you have to bring some sort of humor to it because it is a very dire situation. But yeah, I'm not sure how that shows up on testing from my point of view.
Yeah, I've also heard folks talk about, the difference between, say, a forest fire and a fire that's going through, obviously, structures and the like, in terms of the impacts that it's going to have on your plants. Have others here tried to have their product tested and had results from that?
I'll just say I don't know of any. I have not heard of anybody having product fails through lab testing that are specific to fire impacts.
Yeah, like the smell of smoke won't fail category 3 testing. I wouldn't think,
Well, I want to pivot a little bit, and maybe your experience in other ag can inform this as well. To thinking about practices, what are the sort of strategies folks are using on farm to deal with this at the local level? We'll get to questions, sort of broader policy challenges, but Maggie, you mentioned those that water storage that is required in your county and how that has it sounds like helped with firefighting. Are there other strategies that farmers that you're using on your farm, so that other people in your communities are using, that seem to be effective at navigating these issues?
So I will say that for us, we did have a bulldozer on site that we bought. We did have a tractor with a disc implement, and then we did have a fire truck. So even say worst case scenario, the fire did come close to us, we had fire breaks all around our property with a disc and a bulldozer, making sure that if the fire did get close to us, it would not jump over the road. We had like 50 to 100 foot roads all around our property. And then even worst case scenario, it did cross over. We did have a fire truck, but I wouldn't even rely on the fire truck. I think the most important thing is when there's a fire is you have a disc, and or even if it's just simple disc, yeah, you'll save your property. If you have a bulldozer, great, because you can put out fires with the bulldozer. But with the tractor and a disc, you'll definitely save your property by creating this buffer zone between, the oncoming fires.
Yeah, and people talk about defensible space. This is obviously a vocabulary Cal Fire uses in terms of managing the landscape around your grow. What about other folks?
Yeah, Vincent, I appreciate you sharing all of that. It's really interesting to hear, and I'll just make a comparison. Again, here in Nevada County and most of Northern California counties, our legal cannabis farms are at the largest 10,000 square feet, and they are on people's home residences. And so these are family homesteads. And when it comes to fire preparedness, obviously defensible space, and if, for commercial, having a commercial farm on your property is where the commercial water storage and fire hookups to that water storage come into place. I really think defensible space and having roadside clearance and being in communication with your neighborhood and your local fire teams is critical at this point. It sounds like a lot, especially for, some more rural but neighborhood type of areas, but it's necessary at this point because it could start from a runaway burn pile. It could be an elderly neighbor not taking care of things. And we have micro farms. And so you don't have acreage to defend yourself. You might be on 5 acres and have a undeveloped parcel next to you that is completely a fire hazard. And so it's just a very different landscape than, what's going on, say, in Santa Barbara County, where you've got ample you can create sort of a boundary line barrier on the perimeter and things of that nature. Just want to throw out that comparison.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say I agree with that, but when pardon my words, but when she hits a fire, she hits the fan, like it doesn't matter whether you take down somebody's little garden or not. You're trying to save your property and your neighbor's property. So having a disc and a tractor, on hand, they will thank you later.
Well, I do want to, I didn't say at the beginning, my background is I'm a geographer by training. So like thinking about scale and how these things play out and look differently in different contexts, both sort of different ecological contexts, what is sort of a regional biome, but also, what is the political economy? What do things look like on the ground in terms of the property size, the type of operations people are running? That's going to be part of the mix. Casey, you're out there on the ground right now. Are there any strategies you all are using on farm to reduce the impacts of fire and smoke?
Yeah, just like Vincent said, setting up a kind of a open perimeter around all of our properties so we can run a disc through it or a water truck. If necessary, keep that space open and clear of brush, clear of debris. Kind of a nice little fire line. In some places it's 20 feet, some places it's 500 feet. But then of course we're dealing with a big dust mitigation issue and we, take all the plant matter away from those fire lines. Then we're constantly dealing with dust from those areas. But that's a big one right there is, making sure, and I'm sure your counties are similar, but issues with generators out here, we're not immune to those. So having a backup generator on wells to be able to fill your water truck, I think is a huge step forward and something the county should be allowing farmers to do for their ag wells. Because once the power's out, it doesn't matter how many water trucks you have or how many fire trucks you have, then you're relying on your disc and your dozer. And that's a very dangerous job. I've never done it myself, but I've seen it. And just from having our burn permits that we have on properties, we do big ag burns on allowable days and we communicate with the fire department to do those. And those require a lot of machinery to have on hand to make sure that those burn piles don't get out of control. So mitigation is key, but yeah, having the power to pump the water into those trucks is huge as well. We have different fire tanks and fire suppression systems in our buildings, but that only goes to the offices and some of our shops and things like that. It doesn't go, of course, into the fields. We're all under hoops for the most part out here. So we're really defending a wide open prairie at that point. So really keeping on top of the neighbors and making sure that their fire breaks are consistent as well, whether or not they need help with that. You know, if they need help jumping in, we've helped them burn some of their material before, just so it's not on our fence line or near to an area that's susceptible to jump onto our property or encroach from a neighboring property. So yeah, it's all about prevention and keeping on top of it.
So, just looking at one of the slides you had in the beginning about the threat of wildfire in counties now and in the future, and you see Trinity on the far left, the entire bar is red. We had a perfect storm of everything. We had a 2-lane highway dozer line cut all the way around our property, like someone tossed spaghetti into the forest. But I think Trinity County is under such a threat because of the geography. No matter what you do or how safe or how prepared you are, when it's 4% relative humidity, 40-mile-an-hour winds, and your area has not ever seen a fire, there's nothing you're going to do about it. And you're going to pack up all your stuff and you and your family at the end of the day actually is what matters. You can't, there's nothing that you can do. And, Trinity's geography is so up and down that depending on what side of the mountain you're on will be the determining factor, not unfortunately because of where we are, being a little prepared could possibly help you. But when you're in the mountains and you're on the side of a mountain, fire lines are, it's mainly for your human mind to hope that it helps. But, we saw it come up and over 2 mountains at 8:30 in the morning. I was at the top of our mountain, and by midnight that day, it had burned up and over us into 2 gulches away, with thousands and thousands of dollars being spent on dozer lines, a few days before to protect it. But with just, no rain, and it's ironic because, what you can't see off screen here is it's a whiteout blizzard outside in Trinity County right now. And this is the first weather we've had since mid-December. And that's just the breaks, it's California's in a horrible drought, and fire is, it's almost like the next big business. We had cattle, forestry, gold, cannabis. Now it seems like fire is the next move. It's pretty odd, honest too.
So I want to flag one thing that I think Maggie mentioned, and I've heard talking with other folks, is those kind of community-based, communicating with your neighbors, communicating within your community to
Definitely
do those kind of bottom-up efforts. I know people talking about kind of local fire brigades, just phone trees to get people out in the case of emergency, that kind of thing. But in our last few minutes, and we've got about maybe 5 minutes before I start to wrap us up, really appreciate everybody taking the time today. Want to talk about maybe some of those maybe top-down questions, right? The policy context. A couple folks in the chat have asked about fire insurance and the limitations on that you've maybe encountered. Also thinking about those county level regulations, whether maybe the positive outcomes, some of those county ordinances around water storage, but also I think Casey mentioned the limitations on having those generators in place. So maybe you just talk a little bit about the sort of other questions that are in the mix, or whether that's policy or economic pressures or whatever.
Fire insurance is one of the hottest and most horrendous issues in Nevada County. It doesn't exist whether you have cannabis on your property or not. The California Fair Plan is essentially extortion at this point with the rates that they offer. And these, again, are farms on residential properties. And so you have your home insurance, you're trying to get commercial insurance. Fire insurance just doesn't, it's not a real thing. And what is happening is just devastating when it comes to insurance. PG&E, Nevada County has probably experienced, if not some of the most longest durations and most frequent power shutoffs from PG&E. There are local regulations that allow for certain power, propane or whatever you want to have as your backup fuel for generators. Yes, to Casey's point, generators in California, that's a whole thing at this point. And these are commercial operations, especially if you're running greenhouses. If you don't have the ability to have backup storage, you're done. If you don't have backup storage for running water to irrigate, you're also, and you have been evacuated for X amount of weeks, if you don't have access to your property, whether that's an ag pass program or it just is not safe to let people in, you can't irrigate if you don't have power of some sort, unless it's all gravity fed, which is fewer and far between these days. I think I'll leave it at that for the high priority things for those.
Policy, sort of broader contextual challenges that you're facing? I mean, climate change and sort of the broader mess we're all in California aside, what are things maybe you see that could change either at the county or state level that might affect your ability to face these things with a little bit more resilience?
Yeah, I personally, I think just doing your due diligence when it comes to, knowing that you're helping your rural neighbors in your community. We don't have anything in our ordinance that says you need to have fire storage in your water or, water for fire, but that is something we are implementing on our farm. Do your best in your due diligence, on your farm to help your neighbors out.
I hadn't known about the egg pass thing for other agricultural industries, and knowing how cannabis is often treated differently than other agriculture, I was wondering if there's like a more state level policy change that could be made that would make it easier or faster for counties to adopt an agricultural pass for cannabis.
I'd love to just jump in and say, if the state wanted to designate cannabis as agriculture, we could swirl that in with that one.
Yeah, no, agree with Maggie completely. If that was kind of a statewide initiative, where if they actually treated this crop like they do every other agricultural crop. But yeah, I think County of Santa Barbara in general just has so much cannabis cultivation going on that it was opened up to us a little earlier on. But I think this whole state and every county in the state needs to adopt a program like this and really have a plan of action attached to it, right? Right now, it's just going to be me with my face on a card that has able to show to firefighters and law enforcement to be able to step foot on the property, and that's limited to 3 people per farm, right? So I really have to dig in and figure out, what we're going to save first, or what takes priority over everything else. So it's a tough decision to make, especially our farms. There's residences on all the farms, so do we take care of them first? Do we take care of our genetics first? It's a tricky one right now to figure out who'd even designate those three spots too, because it is limited.
Vincent, I'm not sure if you want to say something in the last couple of minutes we've got, but I put up, Seth had mentioned in the chat, this image on our opening screen here is actually a picture of the sun. So to go back to that question of light, lack of daylight, particularly during the growing season, obviously a big issue with high smoke, even if folks are avoiding actual burns. I also wanted to just leave you with this. This is our survey that I keep mentioning. Again, it's a statewide survey focusing on outdoor cannabis growers, and it's open till the end of the month. And it's an opportunity for you to share your experiences, strategies you've been using, and share those impacts. So we get a statewide view of the variety, the intensity of those impacts, and hopefully pull that together for future research directions, as well as informing kind of policy suggestions that we hope to make out of this. Please do share that with your networks if you can. That link will take you to the survey. And if you have any questions about the research, future directions, want to be involved with the CRC and our work, you can shoot me an email at j.vance.martin@berkeley.edu. Thank you all so much for sticking with us through the technical issues of this, and really appreciate our panelists for coming on and sharing their experiences. we've got a couple minutes left if you all want to have any final thoughts for our audience.
Well, you can see if you go to our, not to plug it, but if you go to our social media, Instagram, Mountain Cannabis Company, we have posted many pictures of the monument fire at the doorstep of our farm and on the farm, and things that we were doing during the fire at the farm to mitigate things like smoke and ash on the plants up until, the day we visited it after the fire and it was hit. So you can see some pretty wild images there.
I'll just leave it by saying that I think for all people involved in policy and who get to the chance to speak to policy makers, I think there is ample opportunity to restructure the narrative and say that cannabis farms can be great assets to helping with our overall landscape fire protection, and that we should not ignore that they are community members in all of these counties who are very up on defensible space, who are thinking about how to keep their neighborhoods safe and how they can be assets for that, and to go from there.
Well, thank you all again so much. Let's keep this conversation going. Fill out the survey. There's an opportunity there to share info, to be involved in future parts of this research. And I'm just really happy, feel very privileged to be able to hear from you all and hopefully amplify your concerns and experiences and make some changes in the state.